Oh boy, our next entry in the Explaining Everything About Gaster miniseries has taken a major shift after the Valentine newsletter has dropped a major Gaster bomb. It's obvious Gaster wants something from us, the players, but what people might not know is how long this has been the case. On the old Deltarune website from 2012 that had an excerpt of entry 17, it was later updated in 2014 with an excerpt from the prophecy from Deltarune. So Gaster most likely wants someone to fulfill this prophecy. At the end of the Undertale sound test that plays Gaster's theme, it says, "Thanks for your feedback, be seeing you soon." We will return to this line later, but I must ask, who do you think is talking here? Also worth mentioning that exiting the redacted room takes you here. Some say this is an error, but I highly doubt it. Then of course we have the time Gaster took over the Deltarune Twitter account. If there was for some reason any doubt that this is Gaster, it has 6 blacked out letters, which is the same number of letters as in Gaster's name. Normal Toby and Gaster not only want to show us something, but Gaster even asks for our input to reach its creation, the thing being Deltarune of course. But when it's first released, it's called Survey Program. We're greeted by Gaster who asks us to make a vessel for ourselves, asking very specific and odd questions, gathering info for something. I strongly believe the second voice is Kara, or at least a different person, so I do think Gaster was planning on giving us this body. The ulterior motive is what he would use the info gathered for. For a very brief time in Chapter 1, Gaster visits us in the file menu and speaks as if he's the one granting us access to the file options, which is interesting as in Undertale we had no one helping us and no access to the save files. We only had one. In the game over, Gaster visits us again and gives us the option to give up. Even in Chapter 2 when our friends take over to encourage us to keep going, Gaster still shows up at the end to give us the option to give up. Again, in Undertale we did not have Gaster or anyone helping us in the files, and did not have the option to give up. Gaster for some reason wants us to have this choice, while not particularly encouraging it. This further emphasizes that Kara is the one removing choice. It's very important to note that Gaster is okay with the roaring happening here. Finally, we make it to where we are now, the unknown newsletter. We'll discuss the possibilities that this isn't Gaster, but first let's look at the letter. First point of note is the character's unsure whether this is a new year or an old year. He directly acknowledges Deltarune, but with a space in between, remember that. Weird quotes like, "the time is going around." When he mentions Valentine's Day, he says there was a rumor of Valentine's, past tense, which means this may not be happening at this very moment. He says every day is a day of love, and especially combined with the first paragraph of the newsletter, it definitely seems to be talking about level of violence here, and not regular love. For the first time ever, he gives us an answer for what he wants. To help someone who he's forgotten, and is most likely himself. He also notes that this is ironic. He asks for our help, we respond out loud, which he responds to in the very same letter. He recruits us and tells us to get to work in the weirdest way possible, and finally says goodbye, but in a strangely spaced and spelt way. Okay, now it's time to break it down while also analyzing the arguments for other candidates. The first and worst argument is that this isn't Gaster is because it's goofy, and Gaster isn't silly. First of all, you can't arbitrarily decide Gaster isn't silly because it doesn't fit your personal interpretation based on the minimal info of Gaster's personality we've been given. Second, this letter is not goofy. Read it again. Read it out loud in a sinister voice with long pauses between all the lines. Think long and hard about the meaning of these words. The best argument is that the Japanese version uses different text style from Gaster, and some of the speaking patterns are off. My rebuttal is, we might be putting too much faith in the speaking patterns. If we go back through all the things Gaster said so far, we'll see his speaking is nowhere near as consistent as we give it credit for. In entry 17 in the old website, he speaks in uppercase wingdings. In Deltarune, it's normal uppercase. If you want to include redacted, we can add lowercase wingdings. And finally, remember the message you get in the sound test? Given everything we've covered so far, it's clear this message is said by Gaster, and it's written in regular punctuated lowercase. And if you think that some of the TrueLab entries were written by Gaster, then you have another account of Gaster speaking in normal punctuation. The takeaway here is Gaster doesn't always speak the same, so what's shocking about him speaking different now? Speaking of the True Lab entries, that's another example of inconsistent punctuation. Sometimes it's written in normal punctuation, and other times it's completely lowercase. Sans usually speaks in lowercase, but there's a single instance in the Kickstarter where he uses an uppercase D for no reason. The Japanese difference is more solid proof, but it's important to note that Toby did struggle a lot with Japanese translation. He released an entire book about it, a book which coincidentally contains the first official acknowledgement of Gaster. We used the Japanese translation to prove Kara is the second voice in the intro, and while it does seem very similar to Kara, it's not exact, but we still use it as evidence. Even so, there are good arguments for some other characters. What's not a good argument is the claim that it's the Chapter 3 secret boss. The only single piece of evidence is that they speak in all caps, which isn't even a given since Spamton speaks around in 50% lowercase. Even so, there's a ton of other characters who speak in all caps. A much bigger part of being a secret boss is being discarded and alone. This character has an assistant and the ability to contact people. And ultimately, this theory doesn't work because we know literally nothing about the Chapter 3 secret boss, and Toby has already hinted at deliberately avoiding foreshadowing it. Next is Des. Again, nothing to imply this. This even contradicts previous texts theorized to be from Des, which are in lowercase, and have the tone of a screaming defenseless child, where this character is clearly not in distress and has a plan. They need help, and that's the only parallel. There's the small chance that Des serves a puppet master role, because Des has a special guitar on the Find Her website, and Noel describes Spamton's puppet scarf, which is made from Spamton's wires, as feeling like guitar strings. But that only means the object itself was puppeting Spamton, and not necessarily Des. The object could be in someone else's possession, and when objects gaining a mind of their own is a common theme in both Undertale and Deltarune. Papyrus is a decent candidate based on personality, caps lock, and the illegible handwriting is something Papyrus has done before, but it does make you wonder why. Papyrus already has so many letters, why give him a secret extra one? What greater role does Papyrus serve? The knight? Maybe. The best candidate is definitely Mike/Tenna/the imaged_friend. It's hard to tell what is what between these three entities, so I'm gonna group them as one. If not Gaster, it would be most likely that this letter serves the purpose as hyping up a character from Chapter 3. Most of this evidence comes from the Twitter user WandyDoodles, but because Twitter sucks, I haven't been able to see the whole thread, so I apologize if there is some obvious evidence I miss. If you've seen my previous theories on Mike, you'll know I strongly believe Mike is the TV head and image/friend, and that Tenna is a second mind that inhabits the same body who has different motives and thoughts to Mike, and essentially acts like a brain parasite. You can immediately see an eccentric TV host personality depending on how we view these words. The character often contradicts themselves and questions their own words. This would make sense if it was two minds in one being, especially when they second-guess themselves about needing help, because it's not the current talker that needs help, but the other mind within him that needs help. Which one is which? We have no way of telling, but personally I think that Mike controls the majority of the body, and since Tenna is supposedly the one who wronged Spamton, they'll be the one with issues and probably the one to need to get help. Towards the end of the letter, the character says perhaps the most important thing, about putting on/washing your face and coat, which has clear ties to the darker-than-dark chair with the coat in the Spamton sweepstakes, which imaged friend is hiding behind it. There's also a voice that speaks in all caps in the Spamton sweepstakes who seems to talk similarly to the letter. One time they even say something that seems to be in direct response to this letter. But wait, I thought we said that Mike was the one writing the letter. Well, there's also a lot of evidence that Mike might be the one the letter is addressed to. The letter mentions putting on your face. Mike definitely has the ability to disembody his face for some reason, and Mike responding out loud to a letter might make sense as a TV that can tune into channels. One of my previous theories for Tenna is that Tenna isn't a character at all, but rather Spamton is cursing out his literal antenna for being the thing responsible for contact with Gaster, which is what ruined him. And thus this letter could give credence back to that idea. But there are a few glaring issues. For one, why is it ironic for Mike to forget someone? His whole role as being a backstabber responsible for Spamton becoming forgotten and discarded. while he remains a famous celebrity. It makes sense that he would forget a helpless person like that. I've seen some people say, including Londy Doodles, that Mike is the one who disappeared when it's clearly implied to be Gaster. If Mike was the same kind of redacted from reality role as Gaster, then why is the entire Spampton sweepstakes, including his name and quotes that may be from him, still up? The shouting voice saying "you're early" doesn't necessarily mean Chapter 3. It could theoretically be any future chapter, and while static would imply Chapter 3, it's also a commonly used basic creepy visual, which was also used on Omega Flowey, who was the final boss of Undertale. I always have seen Mike as some kind of shady business partner with Gaster, so whether he's involved with the letter or not, this is still the role that I think he plays. Just maybe not so direct. But the biggest issue with every candidate other than Gaster is the absolutely absurd status it puts them in. If you gave random reality-breaking powers to Gaster, it would still fit. No one would be too surprised. He's already a very high-ranking being who is interacting with the world in ways that are unlike other characters. Giving one of these powers to any other character is seriously jumping the shark. This character can hear you through the letter, respond through the letter, and can manifest themselves in some weird metaphysical state where they are next to you and can be heard and give items but cannot be seen. Plus, they choose to walk away, so it's definitely not someone who needs saving from some dark place like Des. I could see Papyrus maybe fitting, since he does fly and go out of bounds, and he could possibly be the man behind the tree, but giving these abilities to a Chapter 3 character is really upping the ante. Then again, the last boss was a giant skyscraper-sized robot, and Chapter 4 is likely to have some kind of holy higher power as a boss, so maybe a metaphysical being isn't too big a jump. Another idea I've had for Mike for a long time is that he was less of a living TV and more of a erratic entity that can move between TVs and other electronics, and some people seem to have also picked up this idea. Going back to Mike possibly being the one the letter is addressed to, we also have to mention the abilities of the person this letter is being addressed to. Being able to just force understanding illegible words with the power of their soul, and possibly being able to remove their face, pretty crazy abilities that not every character can just do. But Papyrus also admittedly can fit a lot of these, because Papyrus's head falls off. There's actually a lot of characters that have detaching faces/heads. Everyman can detach his head, the Vessel's head is attached on, Jevel's head can pop out like a jack-in-the-box, Mad Mew Mew's head falls off, Shiren is actually just a head and her body is a separate character, Memory Head has pulsating faces that it can just spawn in, Temmie's face often detaches from her body, and of course, Mike can just manifest as a disembodied face. But it's also important to note that putting on a face is a phrase that often means putting on a fake persona and hiding your true self. There's even a creepy line in the files of Deltarune already that reads, "You've come again to this wonderful place, now tear off the mask beneath your face." Okay, back to Gaster. The one thing here that is a sure sign of Gaster to me is how the letter was updated to just be blank. Gaster has always had this thing with disappearing or being removed. None of the others except maybe Des have this, being that she has her website removed from the Spampton sweepstakes. Most have said that the irony of him forgetting is due to him being forgotten himself, but more likely to me, it proves that the "Don't Forget" letter in Sans' workshop was either written by Gaster or for Gaster, and that's why it's ironic. The space in between the word Deltarune doesn't change anything, because as already stated in previous videos, the prophecy is created by Gaster, and ask how the prophecy we are fulfilling is going is basically him just asking how our adventure is going, which would ultimately be the same thing as asking how the game is going itself. The way goodbye is spelt here is also something that was normal ages ago, and we've long thought that Gaster is a very old man. Spampton's favorite year is 1997, which would likely be the year he was a big shot, which means Mike and Gaster were also alive in that time period. Another thing that's rubbed me and others the wrong way is, isn't it a bit too soon for a major direct Gaster drop? Well, maybe not. The band-aid has already been removed. The dev team isn't treating him like he doesn't exist like they used to. And as previously said, things might be escalating faster than we expected. And one thing that does still repel me from believing a super important lore-focused character will be revealed yet, is Toby specifically said Chapter 3 will be even sillier than Chapter 2. We spent so much time discussing the identity of this writer, we haven't even touched on the timeline-related comments. I would like to recommend Jaru's analysis of the letter, because even though I don't agree with all of his points, particularly ones relating to the patient's soul, he's the only one who's actually bothered analyzing the words, and a lot of them specifically pertain to the ideas that he's presented before. Okay, back to the original point of this video. What does Gaster want from us? The sound test didn't ask for our input at all. We just listened to short loops, almost hypnotizing. Perhaps he's trying to dig his way into our brains? Some have theorized Trouble Dingle is the dots on the Undertale attack graphic put into a song. And Trouble Dingle shows up on the spam to value network, so it has some importance. Considering how he talks of love in the letter, he might be trying to condition us to condone violence. Gaster obviously wants us to help in Deltarune's creation. He's been gathering info on us and wants to give us the choice to let the roaring happen. So whoever he wants to help in this letter is in a position where the end of the world wouldn't change anything. Our only two candidates would be himself and Des. But you have to think, if Gaster did make Deltarune, then Des's peril is his fault. So what does he really want? I think it's about the eternal dilemma of a scientist. Experimentation does not follow morals. If it can be tested, it will. And we've seen a character with that similar mindset. Only, Flowey was stuck in the limitations of the game world he was in. Gaster has transcended far beyond it. Now he can interact with something greater, the player. He wants our input to experiment with Deltarune, and offer us and himself the greatest experience he can create. Well, that one was a doozy. There's still a ton of room for debate, so don't take this as solid as my previous Gaster theories. As always, like and subscribe for more, because there might be only 2 Gaster theories left in this little mini-series. See you then.